Welcome to my third video on sampling. In this video, we're going to talk about attribute sampling. So there's two types of sampling we're going to talk about in this module, attributes and variables. So the next video will be variables, so we're going to cover attributes in this one. So attribute sampling is used basically when we're testing our internal controls. So attribute sampling is trying to determine if a population has a particular attribute or characteristic. So we are using attribute sampling when we're trying to answer a particular yes or no type question. So is an internal control operating the way we think it is? Yes or no? Is there proper authorization? Yes or no? Do they properly document their transactions? Yes or no? Whatever the internal control is that we're trying to study, we're trying to say, is it designed and operating effectively? That's that yes or no question we're trying to answer. So when we are testing internal controls, we're typically going to be using attribute sampling. So how we do this is we first have to think about what is okay. So before we even touch a item or start our testing, we want to think about what would be acceptable for us. So let's say we're talking about an authorized transaction. So that's the control we want. We are going to check. Maybe it's a payment disbursement to make sure it was authorized before it went out. And we say in order for that control to be operating effectively, it needs to be working 98% of the time. So a tolerable deviation rate would be 2%. So as long as 98% of the transactions are authorized and no more than 2% are unauthorized, that's what would be acceptable. So that is going to be our tolerable rate of deviation. So we're going to start off by saying, okay, I know what this control is. I know what's supposed to be happening. What would be an acceptable level where this wouldn't work the way that we think it is? So that's that tolerable rate of deviation. Then we're going to go about all of our testing. We're going to pull all of our items and we're going to say, okay, what's our estimation? That's going to be this upper limit rate of deviation. So we're going to pull our sample, we're going to run our test, and we're going to say, okay, based on what we see in this sample, here's what I think is actually happening in this population. So we're going to compare that upper limit rate of deviation, or what I actually think is happening within the population, to this tolerable rate of deviation to see if I think that the control is operating effectively. So ultimately, I am going to have that upper limit rate of deviation that I'm comparing to my tolerable rate of deviation. And if that upper limit rate of deviation is less than or equal to what is tolerable, then I can go ahead and rely on my control as planned. So if I pull all of my items and my upper limit rate of deviation is 1%, I think that it's operating effectively 99% of the time. My tolerable rate was 2% at the very beginning. Then I can go ahead and rely on that control as I had originally planned and move on with the rest of my testing as I had determined in the very beginning. However, when I run my control tests, I could come up with a situation where that upper limit rate of deviation is greater than my tolerable rate of deviation. So I choose my sample. I'm finding a lot of unauthorized purchases. So I think that it's more like 10% is my upper limit rate of deviation, and only about 90% of those purchases are actually authorized. That's much greater than the 2% that I said was tolerable. So I'm going to have to reduce my planned reliance on controls. So remember, the whole purpose of doing a control test is to say, can I rely on them? What does my substantive test need to be? How big does that net of testing or nature, extent, and timing of testing need to be? So if my upper limit rate of deviation is greater than what I thought was okay, then I'm going to have to reduce that planned reliance on controls and extend my substantive procedures. So what can go wrong? So when we are doing a sample, remember we're looking at a few items and making a conclusion about a larger population. So if you remember from your statistics classes, you can have the type 1 and type 2 errors. That's this risk of over-reliance would be our type 1 error, and the risk of under-reliance is going to be our type 2 error. So in that type 1 error, we have the risk of over-reliance. We're giving the population a thumbs up, but we really should have given it a thumbs down. So we look at a sample, everything looks good in the sample. We say everything looks great. We don't reduce or extend our net of testing. We don't reduce our audit risk to a sufficient level because that population really did have a problem. Those controls were not operating effectively. So that's that risk of over-reliance. The type 2 error is the opposite problem, where we just happen to choose all of the items that are not authorized, but really, if we were to look at all of the items, it would have been fine, but we just happen to choose all the bad ones. So the risk of under-reliance means we are saying, no, there's a problem, there's a deviation, this control is not operating effectively, but in reality, it really was. We just happened to choose the wrong items. So in this case, we could end up extending our audit testing, doing more work than we actually need to do, not relying on a control that we could have relied on because we came to that wrong conclusion. All right, the last thing I want to talk about is determining your sample size. So I used to do, I had charts from the AICPA and we would calculate out your sample size. You would never actually do that in practice today. You're just going to put it into your audit software and it's going to tell you what your sample size needs to be. So this is an output from an audit software called IDEA. And the auditor is going to put in their population size, what they have determined to be their tolerable rate of deviation, what they think is going on based on their prior history, the confidence level that they want to have, and then it's going to spit out their sample size. And in addition to the sample size, it's going to tell them as long as they don't find more than 3 deviations, that they're going to be within the realm of their confidence level. So if they find 3 deviations, they're going to have a confidence level of 95.11. Their confidence level was 95. So they just can look at 127 items and their goal is not to find more than 3 deviations to be within what they had anticipated. So that is how we would enter attribute sampling into a particular audit software to tell us how many items we need to look at. Come back for my last video and learn about variable sampling. That's all for now.